Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Melinda Nusafora. Well, it's a disappearance that has gripped the world for the past 3 weeks. Jamal Khashoggi, a prominent Saudi journalist and critic of his government, vanished after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd. Pressure has been increasing on Saudi Arabia to explain what happened as evidence pointing to a murder mounts. After an extensive search of the Saudi consulate and the Consul General's home, Turkish investigators have started analysing the evidence. Samples are now being tested as authorities try to confirm if Khashoggi was murdered inside the building. Turkish sources say there is audio evidence proving the journalist was tortured and killed there. On the sidelines of the investigation, a whirlwind of shuttle diplomacy has taken place. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has met with leaders in Riyadh and Ankara. US President Donald Trump had initially sided with the Saudi version of events, but after receiving a briefing from Pompeo, says he now believes that Khashoggi is dead. The fallout continues to plague Saudi Arabia and its Crown Prince Mohammed-bin-salman as prominent business leaders and government leaders pull out of an investors' conference in Riyadh. A leading rights group is also urging Turkey to ask the UN to investigate Khashoggi's disappearance. And joining me now is Talep Küçükcan, who is a professor at the Marmara University and a former member of Parliament for the AK Party. Also in our studio, Vepik Baysan, who is a lecturer at the Ibn Khaldun University. And coming to us from Doha, Martin Reardon, a vice president of the Soufan Group, and who's also spent 2 decades at the FBI. Okay, now before we get into, gentlemen, the impact of Khashoggi's possible death and what that is having on global politics, I just want us to break down a little bit more who are the main players in this ever-changing drama. Vepi, we're going to start with you. Let's begin with Jamal Khashoggi. Who is he? And why would the Saudis want him silenced? Why was he considered such a threat?
Well, first of all, he is a very prominent, let's say, intellectual, because what we know about him is identity as a journalist, but he is more than a journalist, actually. He used to be the senior advisor in the palace, as well as in London at the Saudi embassy and in the United States. And he was an outspoken person. Although in many occasions he supported the king family in Saudi Arabia. For example, Saudi's attack on Yemen, the Yemen war, he supported it. And he was also fierce defender of the reforms that actually Prince Salman was kind of taking care of. But also he was upset and again a critic of the, let's say, wrongdoings, and that the Middle East need more freedom of speech as well as more human rights. So that he was really critical on that. So, but would this all what he did constitute that he would be kind of in a way like tricked entering the consulate in Istanbul and then disappearance? Probably there is something more than that. One, what maybe is that he may have been kind of under interrogation, things went wrong. Perhaps the team did not come really just to execute him on a way, but it seems something went wrong.
Something seriously
something
has gone
serious,
wrong there.
Definitely. That's what what we hear. And more importantly, probably they wanted to take him away. But whatever they wanted to do, they wanted to send a clear message to opposition anywhere in the world that actually we can get you. And so that signifies, because such a prominent intellectual being probably taken away and appearing in Riyadh would be a clear sign, but for them it didn't really matter.
And if this is going to be a clear message, Taleb, that message is likely to have come, some will say, from Crown Prince Mohammed-bin-salman. He's only been in power for 16 months. How much influence does he really have? What kind of control does he exercise?
I think let me underline the fact that if it was a message, I think that message has been backfired. It is very clear today because since the disappearance of Khashoggi, all the lights are now on Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince. It is very clear. Yes, he is in the control at the moment, but for the last 16 months, as you have said, initially he was presented as a reformer and also a man who has a vision, because they have published a paper for 2030 vision. It was an opening for Saudi Arabia, a country where traditional and patriarchal structures are there sociologically and politically. But what we can see from the unfolding events, because these events now are unfolding before the whole world, and nothing is hidden, nothing is secret. And I think the fingers are pointing at Prince Salman and his associates. It's very clear.
He seems to have the final say on so many things in Saudi Arabia these days. Even though he is not yet the king, he seems to be the one pulling the strings. How likely is it that something like this could have happened without him knowing?
It is very unlikely that such a thing might happen without his knowledge, because what is clear, as reported in the media, is that 15 men from Saudi Arabia came to Turkey. They were called a hitman, and I think they were responsible for the operation that took place. And I think this will not happen without the knowledge of a leader. It's been hinted by Trump, President Trump, that a raw people or guys might have done the job. But it seems that we are talking about a country where the head of the state or the crown prince controls almost everything. It includes media, universities, intellectuals. I think it is very unlikely that without his knowledge, this operation could have taken place.
Now, we're going to bring in our guest who's joining us from Doha. Martin, thank you so much for your time. I want to bring you in here because you have such a long background with criminal investigations from your time with the FBI. Saudi Arabia has been known in the past to dispose of its critics, but we've never seen international waves of condemnation like we have this time around. What makes this case so different?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. We have seen this before, just not with Saudi Arabia so publicly. But if you look at what's happened in the last 15 months or so, Russia has ordered the execution of dissidents or critics of the Putin administration in the United Kingdom. North Korea had ordered the execution of their leader's brother in Malaysia, who was a critic of that government. So we've seen this before, and I think some of this could be signals given by the White House that what matters now are alliances, and that the White House has more of a tolerance for autocrats, and basically given a green light for acts like this with little repercussion.
Let's talk about the investigation a little bit more here. Specifically these leaks to the media that we just keep seeing almost on a daily basis. Throughout this case, we're hearing Turkish officials, Turkish sources have leaked information to prominent publications and broadcasters. It seems as if the media isn't able to access official information. There have been no press conferences from the police on site, outside the consulate, which we may have expected to see. What is behind that kind of drip feed tactic, do you think? Is this a way for Turkish investigators to shape the global impression of this investigation?
Well, yes, it is. And this is just not Turkey. This happens in large investigations with a number of countries. There are leaks. Some of them are probably sanctioned by the state, other ones perhaps not. But they're giving out this information bit by bit. But the story really hasn't changed since the very first day. The Turkish government, within a matter of hours, said that they thought, publicly, that they thought Khashoggi went in there and was killed. Then the question came up, how are they getting this? And then the question of an audio tape, perhaps coming from his Apple Watch, was one leak that came out. There are other ways that they can get that information from inside the consulate or an embassy. Turkish intelligence service is very sophisticated. They've been a member of NATO for a number of decades, so they've had access to both the technology and the expertise or the training. So this is a deliberate leak of information to keep it in the news and to sort of put the Saudi government in a corner. When this comes out, how do you deny these things? What does the Turkish government really know and what don't they know? Eventually, after the Saudi government comes out with their statement, the Turkish government, I think, is going to make public what they have.
It'll be interesting when they do finally come public with that. But Talib, I want to discuss with you the relationship between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. It's often been a tense political relationship, but it is a very important economic one. I think in just the last year, there have been 800 Saudi companies looking or currently investing in Turkey. With those competing relationships in mind, how different is this for Turkey to investigate?
Well, of course, this is a very sensitive issue for Turkey. On the one hand, you would like to see the reality coming out, what happened to Khashoggi, and I think Turkish investigators are doing quite a good job. But this job, of course, can take place properly only if Saudi Arabia officials can cooperate, because that happened in a consulate that is the land of Saudi Arabia. And I think it took almost 15 days to get in, both the consulate and also the residence of the consul general. So these are some complicated matters, and Turkey cannot take action on its own. You have to cooperate with Saudi Arabia according to the international law. But on the other hand, I think there is an understanding between Turkey and Saudi Arabia now that a light should be shed on this event. And President Erdogan and Prince Salman, I think, talked to on the phone. There's a full cooperation as far as I can see. But the outcome, I think, is quite an important one, because I think the priority for Turkey will be to see what happened to Khashoggi, because this might set a precedent for other countries if Turkey remains silent on this issue. In my mind, Turkey will not remain silent, as you have said. The evidence is now time to time shared with the media. I think, yes, Turkey will, of course, look at the relations with Saudi Arabia. It is a strained relationship recently because of Turkey's cooperation with Qatar and its involvement in the Syrian affairs, etc. But on the whole, Turkey and Saudi Arabia enjoyed a very fruitful relationship in the past, especially from economic point of view.
Vepi, if we look forward then, I mean, Saudi Arabia is such a powerful nation, not least of all because of its control over the oil that so many countries rely on. Going forward, can you see this investigation, this particular drama affecting Turkey and Saudi Arabia's relationship going forward?
Well, actually, it may be an opportunity to put the relation which was suffering in the last couple of years between Turkey and Saudi Arabia, it may be an opportunity to put on the right track this incident, unfortunate incident, so because we should separate, wrongdoings from blaming a total nation, which what we see from Saudi Arabia. I mean, I joined in the Arabic TVs, etc. That's what I realized, that they're blaming the entire Turkish administration, but Turkey has nothing to do with this issue. So that's a normal reaction, but I think this should be used as an opportunity, and actually Turkey and the Saudi Arabia are actually great two actors in the region, and they should work the regional peace and prosperity. Now, we have the Prince actually just announced the NEOM project, which is $500 billion project concerning Jordan and also Palestine, Egypt, and northwestern part of Saudi Arabia. And Turkey should definitely be part of it, and also play a significant role on that. So I'm just very much hoping that these two countries will put this behind and work together.
What about oil? Saudi Arabia has said if it suffers strong retaliation, it can use oil as a weapon. That means then that globally everyone feels the pain then, doesn't it?
Well, indeed, but I think that was a wrong sort of statement by Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's a fact that they're at the edge of bankruptcy. And like 3 years ago, IMF said that if Saudi Arabia continues this way, within 5 years they will really suffer financially, because oil prices were very well down, like $20, $22 per barrel. And now it is $70s or $60, but it's not yet enough to boost their economy. So I think they shouldn't use petrol as a weapon, because it's not going to work out, because they do not always define the price of the petrol. There's an international, let's say, kind of decision makers on that.
We're just going to take a break from our discussions to have a look at how the ties between US and Turkey have been affected by this. Now, the United States has been thrust into this crisis as its role as Saudi Arabia's most important ally comes under intense scrutiny. The messages coming from the White House have been mixed, with President Trump initially siding with Riyadh's denials to acknowledging that Khashoggi probably has been killed. This puts Turkey's relations with the US in an uncomfortable bind, just a week after the two sides cleared a major sticking point in relations. Basil Rayhan tells us how all that came into play after Turkey released US pastor Andrew Brunson after more than 2 years in detention.
For Andrew, it's been a very interesting day because, as you probably heard, I said a little bit earlier, from a Turkish prison to the White House in 24 hours. That's not bad. Actually.
A U.S. pastor at the center of a diplomatic crisis, now home and at the White House, offering praise to the U.S. president.
Make him a great blessing to this country.
Andrew Brunson's return was described by President Donald Trump as a diplomatic victory. The evangelical missionary had been in detention in Turkey for 2 years. Brunson was convicted of a terror-related charge and sentenced to 3 years in prison, but was immediately released by the court for time already served. Brunson's detention dates back to a failed coup attempt in Turkey in 2016. He was arrested in the investigation that followed. The pastor was accused of being a spy with links to PKK terrorists and followers of Fethullah Gulen. Gulen lives in self-imposed exile in the American state of Pennsylvania. He's a cleric and businessman who Turkey accuses of being behind the coup attempt. Turkey has been petitioning the U.S. for his extradition, while the U.S. has resisted, citing a lack of evidence. That has been a major source of friction between the two NATO allies, with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan accusing the West of supporting the coup plotters. Throughout his proceedings, Andrew Brunson, a resident of Turkey for more than 2 decades, consistently maintained his innocence. U.S. officials argued his detention was politically motivated, that Ankara was using him as a bargaining chip in its campaign to extradite Gulen, an allegation Turkey has always denied. Back in August, the tension over Brunson's case escalated. The U.S. imposed sanctions on 2 senior Turkish government officials, followed a week later by tariffs on Turkish steel and aluminium. The U.S. decision sent Turkey's currency into freefall. Ankara responded with tariffs of its own on a range of U.S. products. Now, with Brunson's release, there's hope the relationship is on the mend. Turkey and the U.S. have numerous mutual interests, ranging from trade to combating terrorism to finding a resolution to the Syrian war. But other sources of strain remain. Among them, there's Turkey's purchase of a Russian-made missile defense system. Ankara says the deal is done, which has upset the U.S. Then there's the case of NASA scientist Serkan Golge, a dual U.S.-Turkish national. He's serving a 5-year prison term on terror charges, the U.S. says without credible evidence. While Pastor Andrew Brunson's return to the U.S. marks a significant step towards reconciliation, the question is whether it's also a sign of new will and momentum to restore confidence in a troubled relationship. Basil Rayhan, Straight Talk.
So we're going to continue our discussion on the disappearance of Khashoggi. I'm going to turn to Talib. I want to ask you about Turkey and United States' current relationship. It seemed like they were on the brink of rebuilding what has been a strained relationship with the release of the evangelical pastor Andrew Brunson. Those optimistic hopes of greater cooperation don't really seem to have been borne out during this investigation. What impact do you think this Khashoggi case will have on the ties between the US and Turkey?
I think as far as we can see, I think US also offered some help in terms of sharing intelligence or some other assistance for investigation.
They haven't been particularly forthcoming, though, have they?
Right, but you know, this is not a defining, I think, issue as far as relations between Turkey and the US is concerned. There are some other issues that are much more important. Yes, I think if the whole world can come together and then cooperate on this issue, not to cover up that issue. That's very important. And I think Turkey is not going to cover up. That's my belief. But when you look at the signals from the United States, there are, I think, conflicting signals. Some say, well, we have a large amount of investment and also agreement. We are going to sell them, $100 billion of weapon. We should not, hurt this kind of relationship. I think Turkey is not on that track. Turkey says, the truth should come out of it at the expense, whatever happens. The relations between Turkey and U.S. are, I think, influenced by other factors. The release of Branson has been a welcome issue by both sides, I think. So this is a starting issue, but there are some other issues that are related to Syria, support of U.S. to PYD, YPG.
There's still a lot for them to be able to work through.
Relations with Russia and also Iran. These are the issues I think Turkey and United States will be talking about when for the future, not the Khashoggi issue.
Martin, I just want to ask another question to you. The United States has done quite a good job sitting on the fence of this issue. We've had the President Donald Trump supporting Saudi Arabia's denials, then coming out saying that perhaps Khashoggi is dead after all. He has been quite tempered in his response. Why? Why does Saudi Arabia exercise so much power when it comes to the United States?
I think it goes again with the Trump administration. Saudi Arabia is a very important ally. Mohammed-bin-salman is, for all intents and purposes, the leader of that country. And the Trump administration wants to have that close relation with Saudi Arabia and not do anything to jeopardize that relationship for a number of things. One, Saudi Arabia is the leading exporter of oil in the world, and that has a major effect on global markets, not so much on the U.S. demand for oil, but on the global markets. Saudi Arabia is a major player in the U.S. Strategy to contain Iranian influence. And then, of course, you've got the U.S. defense sales. Saudi Arabia is the largest buyer of U.S. defense materials, aircraft, weapon systems, technology.
I want to ask you about that defense
deal.
Trump
does not want to jeopardize that.
Does it send the wrong message? Donald Trump's continued support of Saudi Arabia, citing this arms deal, does it send the wrong message to maybe other authoritarian regimes in that region that you can effectively buy your way out of consequences?
No, so it does send out that conflicting message, but the United States is careful on this. If Saudi Arabia does not buy those defense goods from the United States, they're going to buy them from Russia or they're going to buy them from China. Both those countries are trying to break into that market. The United States does not want to do that because they don't want Russia or China to have a greater influence in the Gulf region. So they're looking at the bigger picture. Maybe not from a publicity standpoint. I don't think the Trump administration is handling this correctly because they're still giving the benefit of the doubt to Mohammed-bin-salman, but they're looking at the bigger picture of the importance of that U.S.-Saudi relationship for a number of reasons: oil, Iran, Russia, and China.
All right, Vepi, we're going to give the last word on this discussion to you as we now turn back to Crown Prince Mohammed-bin-salman. He was seen in the West as the great reformer here. Donald Trump's son-in-law and Middle East peace negotiator Jared Kushner is one of his biggest champions. How much has his international image been damaged by this, and can he come back from it?
Well, a lot. I think he heavily invested on this image. Saudi Arabia's image never been better until that incident, actually. You can see that they're getting a lot of advice from international companies and all that. Very carefully kind of crafted steps taken. And he has to get back. But it's not only international image. First of all, he has to solidify his power within Saudi Arabia. This is the main problem because line of succession changed in 2015. His father became crown prince and later the king. And then he kind of removed Mohammed bin Nayef and appointed his own son. So these are all created a lot of negative energy in Saudi Arabia. So therefore, they were very careful on that, handling the internal issues. As you remember last year, a lot of people got arrested, etc. And the world just sat and watched. And among them was quite prominent investors. So international image is very, very important for them. I think they will do their best to gain it back. But from the international perspective, especially from the United States point of view, Saudi Arabia should remain as a country in one piece, because any internal kind of collapse will jeopardize the region, the Middle East. So therefore, probably they will ignore many of the things and they will do their best to bring back the prince.
There is so much at stake. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out on the diplomatic and international political fronts. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk. Well, that's all we have time for in this edition of Straight Talk with me, Melinda Nusafora. If you've got any comments or suggestions, do share them with us on Twitter with #StraightTalk. And also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.